In a small, seemingly idyllic town, my life unfolded under the watchful gaze of the community I served. I am a judge, and my career has been dedicated to upholding the principles of justice and fairness. After years of hard work and commitment, I earned the respect of my colleagues and neighbors alike. The courtroom became my arena, where I fought not just for the law but for the very essence of truth and equity. My journey began long before I donned the black robe. I grew up in a family that valued integrity above all else. This foundation guided me through law school and into a position that allowed me to influence my community positively. Each case I presided over sharpened my dedication to ensuring that every voice was heard, regardless of social standing or background. With each verdict delivered, I felt a deep sense of responsibility to those who entrusted their lives and disputes to me. As I navigated the complexities of my role, however, it became clear that not everyone in our town shared that same commitment to fairness. The local Homeowners Association, or HOA, wielded power that bordered on tyrannical. Its members were known for their rigid enforcement of rules and often harbored an air of intimidation towards those who dared to oppose them. Many residents lived in fear of their authority, believing compliance was the only path to peace. But I stood apart from this culture of submission. My decision to opt out of the HOA was rooted in a conviction that governance should be collective and transparent, not dictated by a few power-hungry individuals. Little did I know that this stance would ignite a series of events that would change my life forever. As tensions rose, I found myself at the epicenter of a conflict fueled by retaliation and fear. A judge surrounded by an adversary intent on making an example out of me. Our neighborhood's Homeowners Association, ostensibly formed for community betterment, wielded significant influence. Its initial purpose of upholding property values and improving living standards gradually transformed into a regime of rigid control, inspiring apprehension among many residents. The HOA's regulations evolved into an intricate network governing aspects from exterior paint hues to lawn upkeep and seasonal adornments. The sheer volume of these mandates aimed to enforce a specific vision of suburban uniformity. HOA members, zealous in their enforcement, utilized their positions to exert authority over every homeowner. Routine meetings fostered an atmosphere of intimidation. Dissenting opinions were swiftly suppressed, and challenges to the established order were met with antagonism. Conformity became paramount. Deviations from the prescribed standards resulted in penalties, fines, warnings, or escalated actions. The community's atmosphere soured, as neighbors regarded each other with suspicion rather than camaraderie. An unspoken agreement emerged. Maintaining good standing with the HOA required adherence to its dictates and surveillance of potential transgressors. Many felt constrained, compelled to comply or risk becoming targets of excessive scrutiny. The once pleasant ambience of our neighborhood dissipated, replaced by unease and skepticism. My choice to withdraw from the HOA was perceived as more than a rejection of its rules. It was interpreted as a direct challenge to their power. This decision aroused their disapproval and mistrust. The association viewed me as a disruptive element to their meticulously maintained order. In their perception, I had violated an unspoken boundary, initiating a conflict that transcended mere property disputes. My personal decision exposed the subtle power dynamics within our seemingly serene community. The moment I decided not to join the Homeowners Association, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. My choice was not made lightly. It stemmed from deeply held beliefs about governance and community. I had always envisioned a neighborhood where residents engaged in open dialogue and made decisions collaboratively, rather than adhering to rigid rules imposed by a select few. The idea of entrusting my home to an organization that prioritized conformity over individuality felt profoundly unsettling. Financial considerations also weighed heavily on my decision. Joining the HOA would mean additional funds that could be better spent on improvements to my home or investments for the future. With the economy fluctuating, I felt it prudent to allocate my resources wisely, avoiding unnecessary expenditures that offered little in return. The promise of a pristine neighborhood fell flat when weighed against the financial burden it imposed. Additionally, I had witnessed firsthand the destructive impact of HOAs in other communities. Friends had shared horror stories of petty disputes escalating into legal battles over trivial issues. Neighbors who once had cordial relationships found themselves at odds, pitted against each other over compliance violations or aesthetic disagreements. The erosion of camaraderie in those neighborhoods left a lasting impression on me, reinforcing my resolve to steer clear of such an environment. As I informed the HOA of my decision, I sensed the shift in their demeanor. What had begun as polite correspondence quickly turned sour, revealing an underlying hostility that surprised me. My refusal to conform was met with disdain. I had unknowingly cast myself as an outsider in their well-ordered world. The rejection of their authority ignited something primal within Homeowner, a need to assert their control over me. What I thought would be a mere administrative decision soon morphed into a confrontation with a force determined to maintain its grip on power. Little did I know that this choice would set off a chain of events that would challenge everything I stood for, dragging me into a battle for justice against the very institution I had sought to avoid. The weeks following my withdrawal from the HOA brought an unforeseen surge in tension. Initially, it surfaced as thinly veiled remarks from neighbors, whispers that lingered like a brewing storm. A formal letter arrived, steeped in legal complexities, citing property violations that seemed conjured from thin air the moment I declared my independence. It felt like a deliberate strategy aimed to coerce me back into compliance. Every communication heightened the hostility. Notices became commonplace, levying fines for fabricated offenses, my mailbox deemed unsightly, my garden non-compliant. They scrutinized every detail, vigilantly seeking any deviation from their rigid standards, as if any act of independence warranted retribution. I found myself facing an organization determined to make an example of me, each penalty a stark reminder of my perceived ostracism. The harassment transcended mere written warnings. HOA members began patrolling the neighborhood, openly inspecting my property. Neighbors, once amicable, now averted their gaze, as if I had suddenly become an outcast. Unexpected visits occurred, with HOA representatives delivering veiled threats disguised as concern, advising me to reconsider my decision before facing more severe repercussions. Each passing day amplified my sense of isolation, targeted by a system designed to enforce conformity and suppress dissent. The community's underlying fear became tangible, yet there was a disquieting undercurrent. Their fear of me mirrored my fear of them. As a judge, I occupied a position of influence that they couldn't easily dismiss, and unbeknownst to them, this authority would soon intertwine with my fight for justice. This escalating conflict revealed a grim reality of life under an oppressive regime cloaked as community leadership. The HOA had transformed into an adversary determined to quash any semblance of defiance, obscuring the boundary between governance and oppression. Unbeknownst to them, their relentless pursuit would trigger consequences far exceeding their expectations. The night began innocently enough, the deceptive calm before an unforeseen storm. I sought solace in quiet contemplation, the lamplight painting gentle shadows across my living room. The moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, cast its glow upon the glass. Unbeknownst to me, this peaceful haven was about to become a stage for terror. The first whisper of danger arrived as a subtle crackling, a sound so faint it barely registered. Curiosity piqued, I moved to investigate. The crackle intensified, growing into a ravenous roar. Fire had taken hold nearby. The sharp, bitter scent of smoke invaded the air, and the chilling truth crashed down upon me. My home was burning. Driven by instinct, I bolted outside, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Flames clawed at the house, turning the night into a grotesque spectacle. Neighbors spilled from their doorways, their faces etched with disbelief. Some stood frozen while others frantically dialed for help. Stories began to circulate, a confusing jumble of eyewitness accounts. Several neighbors spoke of shadowy figures seen near my property just before the blaze. They mentioned hushed voices, snippets of conversation hinting at something malevolent. The words struggled to penetrate my shock. Disbelief threatened to consume me. Who could commit such an act? And what was their motive? As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, the grim reality solidified. This was no accident. It was a deliberate act, fueled by malice a euro, the bitter fruit of escalating disputes with the HOA, now twisted into something truly monstrous. While the local police and fire department conducted their official inquiries, my dual role as a judge and community member instilled in me a profound sense of urgency. I needed to explore every avenue, chase every shadow, and connect the dots that others might miss. The hushed concerns voiced by my neighbors resonated within me, adding fuel to the fire of my determination. I meticulously revisited past conversations with residents, sifting through their recollections for fragments of insight. Eyewitness firefighters descended, battling the flames with fierce determination, but a sense of despair settled over me. My home, my sanctuary, was irrevocably lost. Yet, amidst the devastation, watching my memories turn to ash, a fierce resolve ignited within me. This assault would not go unanswered. I would pursue justice for this act of destruction, not only for myself but as a stand against the tyranny that masquerades as community governance. The fight had just begun, and I would not back down. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, chaos reigned as police and fire crews rushed to the scene, transforming my once peaceful street into a hub of flashing lights and frantic activity. Firefighters battled the flames, their shouts and crackling hoses cutting through the air as they worked to prevent further spread. Each burst of water was met with hissing steam rising from the charred remains of my home, a stark reminder of the devastation that had unfolded just moments before. As I stood on the lawn, watching the destruction of my life, police officers began interviewing neighbors. Their questions ranged from the mundane euro, asking about the time I had last been seen at home euro, to probing into the unusual sights reported earlier that night. It was hard to discern who was more shaken, me or the community members gathered around, their faces marked by disbelief and concern. Whispers circulated among them, hints of suspicion and fear that perhaps something far more sinister lay beneath the surface of our neighborhood. With each testimony received, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that lingering tensions with the HOA could not be ignored. Neighbors shared their own discomforts about the association's aggressive tactics, and some voiced concerns about the darkness encroaching on what was once a harmonious community. I saw glances exchanged to euro, their eyes reflecting a collective understanding that defiance against authority could have dire consequences. In those critical hours, investigators sifted through debris searching for answers. They looked for traces of accelerants, revealing signs that this had not been a random act but a calculated strike against my home. As I stood amidst the wreckage of what had once been my refuge, I couldn't shake the growing certainty that this fire was not just an act of destruction. It was a message. The atmosphere buzzed with speculation about who might want to harm me. The HOA, cloaked in its facade of community leadership, loomed large in my mind as I began to connect the dots. As plans for a formal inquiry took shape, I prepared myself for what would be a long battle euro, not just for justice but for truth in a community where shadows now danced ominously along the edges of our shared existence. As the investigation into the devastating fire progressed, I felt compelled to delve deeper, my resolve hardening with each passing hour. Counts of shadowy figures lurking near my property now carried a sinister weight. The descriptions offered bore a striking resemblance to several members of the Homeowners Association, HOA, individuals notorious for their staunch adherence to the association's dictates and their open contempt for dissent. Day after day, I immersed myself in publicly accessible HOA documents, searching for any discernible patterns that might link them to the arson. Scrutinizing meeting minutes and financial statements, I unearthed a disturbing trend, a pattern of punitive actions directed at those who dared to challenge the HOA's authority. What had initially appeared as minor disputes now revealed a deliberate campaign of intimidation and control. The pivotal moment arrived when a neighbor confided in me about an overheard conversation between two HOA members. Their hushed discussion revolved around setting an example for those who opposed them, casually dismissing my refusal to join as an act of defiance warranting severe consequences. The chilling implications of their words left no doubt in my mind. A direct connection existed between the fire and the HOA's oppressive tactics. Armed with this critical information, I once again approached the authorities, urging them to extend their investigation to include the HOA's potential involvement. My standing as a judge lent credence to my assertions. I was not merely a disgruntled resident peddling unsubstantiated theories, but a figure dedicated to upholding justice and accountability. This was not solely about seeking revenge. It was about defending what is right and safeguarding our community from those willing to employ violence to maintain their grip on power. With the pieces of the puzzle slowly coalescing, I recognized that this battle extended far beyond my personal grievances. It represented a broader struggle against the insidious nature of tyranny, concealed beneath the veneer of community governance. Resolved to expose the truth, I braced myself for the trials ahead, a confrontation that would demand every ounce of courage and conviction I possessed, a battle for the very soul of our community. As the investigation progressed, I found myself increasingly immersed in the legal implications of the fire that had destroyed my home. The evidence I had gathered painted a troubling picture, one that suggested potential charges against certain members of the HOA. My insights as a judge shaped my understanding of the complexities involved, not merely as a victim but also as someone intimately familiar with the law. Law enforcement took my allegations seriously, launching a dedicated inquiry into the HOA's potential involvement. I worked closely with detectives, sharing insights gleaned from my investigation, including eyewitness statements and overheard conversations that indicated a motive for retaliation. It was apparent that if they were going to pursue charges, they would need solid proof to connect the HOA members to this heinous act. As we delved deeper, discussions of arson charges loomed on the horizon. In many states, intentional acts leading to property damage could carry severe penalties, particularly when targeting an individual based on their choices or affiliations. I could envision the ramifications not only for those directly involved but for the entire HOA structure, which thrived on control through intimidation. Navigating this legal landscape became a complex dance between my judicial role and personal stake in the case. I remained cautious not to overstep boundaries. However, my expertise allowed me to suggest strategies to investigators about how best to approach interviewing key witnesses and gathering necessary evidence without jeopardizing their rights. The atmosphere within our community shifted as news of my involvement spread. Some residents rallied in support, emboldened by the idea that someone was finally standing up to an oppressive force they had long feared. Others were wary, concerned about potential backlash from the HOA's powerful members who had instilled fear for far too long. In this turbulent environment, I understood that pursuing justice would require not only legal acuity, but also immense courage, both personally and for those willing to testify against entrenched authority. As we readied ourselves for potential legal battles ahead, I felt an unwavering resolve to challenge not just an act of violence but also the very ethos behind it. A culture of conformity that suffocated individuality and threatened community integrity. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. I was prepared to face whatever came my way in pursuit of truth and justice. As news of the fire spread throughout the community, reactions erupted like sparks in dry brush, igniting both sympathy and division among neighbors. For some residents, I became a symbol of resiliency, a judge who dared to challenge the oppressive grip of the Homeowners Association. They rallied around me, bringing offers of support and encouragement. They expressed their frustrations openly, sharing stories of how the HOA had stifled their voices and imposed unjust penalties for trivial infractions. Tears were shed in my garden as friends helped sift through the debris, sharing laughter and despair in equal measure. These acts of kindness restored a sense of camaraderie that had long been overshadowed by fear. In those moments, it felt as though the community was awakening from a long slumber, ready to confront an oppressive authority that had controlled us all for too long. However, this growing support came with a cost. Others in the neighborhood remained fiercely loyal to the HOA, viewing my stance as an attack on the community itself. They argued that I was inciting trouble, sowing discord among residents who had once enjoyed a peaceful coexistence. Some branded me as an outsider, claiming I was not fit to pass judgment on what they deemed necessary governance. These divisions manifested in quiet shunning or hushed conversations as people chose sides. The atmosphere became increasingly charged with tension, akin to a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Neighbors began to look at one another with suspicion. Lines were drawn between those who supported my quest for justice and those who sought to maintain the status quo under HOA rule. In casual exchanges at the grocery store or during morning dog walks, whispers turned into heated debates about individual rights versus communal responsibility. The HOA itself capitalized on this division, attempting to manipulate sentiment by framing their actions as necessary for maintaining property values and neighborhood harmony. Flyers circulated that painted me as a troublemaker rather than a victim, seeking to undermine my credibility further. Caught in this whirlwind of conflicting allegiances, I realized that seeking justice wouldn't just be about exposing the truth behind the fire. It would also involve rallying this fractured community toward a shared understanding of freedom from oppression, a much larger battle that required unity among neighbors willing to stand against tyranny together. The courtroom was filled with tension as the day of reckoning arrived. I took my place at the bench, a judge surrounded by an air of solemnity that felt almost electric. This was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the battleground where principles of justice would clash head-on with the oppressive shadow of the HOA that had so violently encroached upon my life. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as the HOA members filed in, their expressions revealing a mixture of arrogance and disdain. They remained confident, believing their power shielded them from accountability. As I observed their demeanor, I couldn't help but reflect on the divide that had formed in our community, a rift exacerbated by their actions and my refusal to succumb to their tyranny. As the proceedings began, I leaned into my role as a judge and advocate for truth. The prosecution laid out the evidence gathered during the investigation, highlighting eyewitness accounts and suspicious activities surrounding that fateful night. Each testimony painted a picture of intimidation and retaliation driven by fear, a desperate attempt to maintain control over anyone who dared to defy the norms established by the HOA. When I called forward my own witnesses, those brave enough to speak out against the HOA's bully tactics, it was evident that they were fueled by a desire for justice rather than malice. Their voices quivered but rose with conviction as they recounted instances of harassment, echoing sentiments shared in whispered conversations around our neighborhood. The courage of these residents crystallized the stakes of our collective struggle, for it was no longer just my home at risk. It was about reclaiming our community spirit. The confrontation reached a fever pitch when one of the HOA leaders took the stand. Defiant, he dismissed all allegations as fabrications aimed at discrediting an organization dedicated to maintaining property values and cohesion within our neighborhood. His bravado faltered under cross-examination, revealing cracks in his defense as he struggled to distance himself from discussions about making an example of dissenters. With each passing moment, it became clear. This courtroom was not solely a venue for legal judgments, but a stage illuminating deep fractures within our community. I found myself not only judging actions but also standing resolutely for fairness against an entrenched system bent on suppressing dissent at any cost. As we approached closing statements, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose settling over me. This trial had transcended personal grievances. It had become a defining moment not just for myself, but for everyone seeking freedom from oppression, a pivotal stand against whatever came next in our fight for justice. In the midst of this tumultuous battle, my mind churned with moral dilemmas that felt all-consuming. Here I stood as both judge and victim, wearing the heavy mantle of authority while grappling with the devastating fallout of my decisions. The duality of my role forced me to confront the very essence of justice and the implications of wielding power against those who had sought to silence me. As I considered community governance, I reflected on the delicate balance between order and oppression. At what point does the effort to maintain harmony devolve into tyranny? The HOA's facade of protecting property values masked a much darker reality, a culture of fear that stifled individual expression and critical thought. I had once believed that authorities should foster growth and inclusivity, yet now I faced a grotesque caricature of leadership, where intimidation supplanted genuine community spirit. Personal responsibility weighed heavily on my conscience. I understood that my refusal to join the HOA was not merely an act of defiance. It had incited a conflict that ultimately jeopardized my home and well-being. Would I have been better off complying, silencing my convictions for the sake of peace? Yet, Deep inside, I recognized that yielding would only entrench their control, making tolerable the unacceptable. In this labyrinth of ethics, I also faced the question of accountability. How could I hold others accountable for their actions while simultaneously navigating my own desires for retribution? My role as a judge demanded impartiality and fairness, but emotions clouded my objectivity as I confronted those who had precipitated such chaos in my life. As the trial progressed and more truths came to light, it became evident that my journey was not just about personal vindication. It symbolized a larger fight against complacencia euro, a plea for justice echoing through a fractured community that had long been subdued. Ultimately, finding resolution meant reconciling these ethical concerns within myself as I forged ahead. In doing so, I hope to illuminate a path toward healing for not only myself but for all who had suffered under the oppressive watch of the HOA's reign. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was an awakening, a chance to redefine our community euro's moral compass in the face of adversity. As the dust settled after the courtroom drama, a sense of resolution permeated our community. The verdict resonated deeply. Several HOA members were found guilty of conspiracy related to the arson that destroyed my home. The decision sent shockwaves through the association and its residents, who had long endured an atmosphere of fear. The implications were far-reaching. The convicted board members faced penalties, but also intense scrutiny, which triggered a necessary reassessment of the HOA's structure. A decisive call for reform arose, with residents uniting to draft new bylaws designed to enhance transparency and encourage participatory governance. Dissent, once stifled by intimidation, became a vital component of a healthy community dialogue. I reflected on my journey through this ordeal. My role as both victim and advocate carried more weight than I had foreseen. I had fought not only for my home but also for those who felt suppressed by an overbearing regime. In seeking justice, I also uncovered a resilience within our fractured community. Conversations with neighbors evolved from fearful whispers into vibrant discussions, filled with hope for a better future. People shared their stories openly, acknowledging past grievances while focusing on building a community based on cooperation rather than mere compliance. Amidst the rebuilding efforts, surrounded by those who had previously hesitated to speak out, I felt a wave of gratitude. This experience had not only ignited change but had also fostered connections that surpassed our differences. As we rebuilt homes, trust, and solidarity, I realized that true victory lay not in punishment, but in transformation. In this new spirit of resilience and unity, I found closure, not just in the case's outcome, but in the belief that together, we could rise from the ashes of oppression. We would forge a community defined by collective strength and shared values. The fight against tyranny had served as an awakening, reminding us that justice is not merely a destination but a journey worth undertaking together. The journey I undertook through the fire and into the courtroom illuminated invaluable lessons about community, governance, and individual rights. This experience serves as a cautionary tale for homeowners and communities everywhere, highlighting the critical need to remain vigilant against corruption and intimidation within organizations designed for collective benefit. First and foremost, my story underscores the importance of transparency in any governing body, including HOAs. It is vital that homeowners advocate for clear policies and open channels of communication. When residents remain passive or apathetic, they unintentionally allow power to consolidate in the hands of a few, leading to oppressive practices that can erode the very spirit of community. Vigilance and active participation are essential to ensuring that governance serves everyone rather than just a select few. My saga also emphasizes the significance of individual rights, namely, the courage to stand up against injustice. The moment I opted out of the HOA was a pivotal choice that sparked both reprisal and solidarity. It brought forth an awareness among my neighbors about their own rights and their power as a collective voice. Each resident Euro's willingness to speak out created a ripple effect, inspiring others to discern boundaries between reasonable governance and unwarranted control. Moreover, this experience reveals the moral imperative of supporting those who dare to challenge tyranny at any level. My personal journey resonated throughout the community as individuals rallied together against intimidation, leading to profound transformations in our dynamics. we discovered that success lies not only in addressing grievances but also in fostering collaboration and trust among neighbors. Ultimately, standing up against oppression isn't just about one person's struggle. It is a shared responsibility, a commitment to uphold justice for all members within a community. My experiences serve as a powerful reminder that resilience can emerge from adversity when united under a common cause: the defense of our homes, our rights, and our shared humanity against all forms of oppression. As we move forward together, let this narrative remind us that true community strength comes from empowering each other to speak truthfully, engage courageously, and cultivate an environment where everyone can thrive without fear or intimidation. A lesson worth embracing for generations to come.